أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the second night of our special Muharram program. As you can see, we have moved outdoors, so still working on some details. Inshallah, we'll get better as we move on. I don't want to take much of your time, but inshallah, every night we start at 8 p.m. with Maghrib and Isha prayers. We continue with Ziyara, Ashura, and then we continue with the Quran recitation, the speech, and finally some eulogy and azadari, inshallah. That will be the plan. Our programs will continue until Saturday, August 21st. We are so privileged to have the presence of Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Seyyed Ali Musawi, who has joined us from San Diego. Inshallah, we all benefit from his wisdom. He's talking about a topic related to spirituality in light of Karbala. So inshallah, without any further delay, let's welcome our speaker to the podium with your loudest salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
دستشون در نکنه. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من شر الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. My dear brothers and sisters, last night we began with a narration by the Holy Prophet many years before the events of Karbala. The Holy Prophet, he narrates in a tradition where he says, إن لقتل الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لن تبرد أبدا. The Holy Prophet, years before the events of Karbala, he tells the Muslim community, he says that in the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, in the killing of Imam Hussein, a fire, a heat is going to be created in the hearts of the believers, and this is something which can never be extinguished. Subhanallah, when we look throughout the history, when we look throughout the history of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, one of the beautiful things that we find is that no matter how much effort and energy the tyrants, the tyrannical rulers, they exerted to remove this love from the hearts of the believers, they were not able to remove it. One of the stories my Iraqi brothers would tell us is that during the time of Saddam, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Arba'in walk that has become popular today. During the time of Saddam, he felt a threat, he felt fearful of these individuals performing this walk where they were walking from the city of Najaf all the way to the city of Karbala. Because he felt this fear, Saddam banned, he would not allow the Shias to do this walk. He worried if this year 100 people go, next year 10,000 people go, the next year is going to be 1,000,000 people. This is a threat to my rule. He banned the people. He said that anyone who does this walk, if my guards, if my policemen, they catch them, they are not only going to be imprisoned, but they are going to be executed. And Saddam, he wasn't someone to joke around. If he arrested you, your whole family would be arrested as well. If you were executed, your entire family would be executed as well. In spite of this, my brothers and sisters, people would still go on the walk. They were narrating that at night, when the sun would set, they would begin the walk. And when the morning came, they would hide in the houses of those faithful Shias that were along the path. They would sleep in those houses, and then when nighttime came, again they would continue on the path. No matter how much the tyrants have pushed, no matter how much the tyrants have tried to remove this love from the hearts of the believers, it's something which persists. And not only does it persist, but in fact it gets greater and greater every year that goes by. Yesterday we went over this idea that when the Imam was on the plains of Karbala on the day of Ashura, all of his companions had been killed. Everyone was killed. Only the Imam was left. On that day, he makes a call. He calls out, "Is there anyone who can come to my aid?" Yesterday we were going over this idea, this concept, that when we're looking at the context of the Imam making this call, who is he calling out to? Because on his side, there's nobody left. Everyone has been killed. On the side of the enemy, if they wanted to join, they would have joined by now. They've already killed all of his companions. They're not going to come to his side. Who was the Imam calling to when he said this call? One of the answers which the scholars have mentioned, my brothers and sisters, is that the Imam was making a call that resonated through time, and it reaches the ears of the believers who are alive in a time like today. When the Imam is calling, he's asking, who is there who can come to our aid? He's calling on you. He's calling on us. So when we're looking at these majalis during the holy month of Muharram, one of the ways that is good to look at, one of the ways that is good to perceive, is that what we are doing in these 10 nights is we are getting ourselves ready so that when that call becomes active, we can answer that call. Now, of course, the call is a reality every single day that we wake up. We make choices. Every single day that we make up, we either answer that call of Imam Hussein, we walk on that path, or we make the opposite choices. We go in the opposite direction. My brothers and sisters, that call that we're still hearing in our ears, is there anyone who can come to our aid? It is a call that we need to really take to heart. If we spend time in these 10 nights, in these majalis, we cry, we mourn, it's good, it has barakah, it has blessings. But if we don't really look deep within ourselves, if we don't change that reality which is within ourselves, then it's not going to have that intended purpose. Every single person, they have a weakness within themselves. There is something which is stopping them from really actualizing at the highest levels the answer of that call. There's something in everybody, and only we know what it is. These 10 nights, my brothers and sisters, they are an opportunity to reflect, to look inwards, to transform ourselves, so that one day when our Imam comes, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, he makes that same call, is there anyone who can come to my aid? We will be able to aid him, we will be able to help him. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight I just want to take a pause right here, and I wanted to mention a few points that inshallah will help us in really actualizing the month of Muharram and really making the best use of this holy month of Muharram. Some of them are going to seem common sense, they are going to seem obvious, but the effect which they have upon us spiritually is very profound. I'm going to mention 4 or 5 things, my brothers and sisters. The first thing, my brothers and sisters, when we are talking about changing, when we are talking about transforming, the first thing that we have to do in this month of Muharram is we have to actually ask ourselves that important question: what is it that I want out of my life in this world? What do you want? Allah, inshallah, He's going to bless all of you with a long life. But even at the longest, He's going to give us how many years? 70, 80, maybe 90, 100. Eventually it comes to an end. The question which I have to ask myself, and I have to be honest with myself, is what is it that I really, really want from this life? One of the dangers that we face, especially as we get older, is we become very good at covering things up. We become very good at deceiving ourselves. I'll never forget 10th grade, 11th grade. AP Art History class. I don't even know why I was in that class. One of the people, we had just been assigned a lesson, a homework assignment. One of the people that was sitting next to me when he was assigned that homework, he said, tonight's a Friday night, I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to work on it for 3 hours. I'm not going to leave the house. I'm not going to go out. Tomorrow I'm going to put another 3 hours into it. On Sunday I'm going to perfect this essay. On Monday I'm going to come and I'm going to give this essay to the teacher. It's going to be beautiful. Then he looks at himself and he looks down and he says, you know what? I'm too old to be lying to myself. And it's fascinating, you know, that has stuck with me throughout all of these years. That many times we speak about being honest with others. For example, don't lie, it's a grave sin. But rarely do we talk about being honest with ourselves. Who am I? What are my strong points? What are my weak points? Where am I going in life? Am I happy with where I am right now? If Allah was to take me right now, and there were many people who were alive yesterday, they're not alive anymore, they've been taken from us. If Allah takes me at this moment, would I be happy? Would I be satisfied? Honestly, it's so difficult to be honest with ourselves, but really if we're talking about that transformation during the holy month of Muharram, the first step is in actually being honest with ourselves. And what we have to do is we have to have clear goals of what we want to achieve and who we want to be. That's also another danger point. Many times when you ask people a question, what do you want in life? It's very vague, it's very fuzzy. For example, if you ask them, what do you want to achieve during the holy month of Muharram? They're going to say that I want to be more spiritual. But when you ask them how, you ask them about the details, how are you going to achieve that? What are the steps? They're going to tell you, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it that much. The key thing here in this month is, one, we have to ask that question of what do we want? And then we have to go to step 2, and that is of how we are going to be able to achieve that. It's critical. We do it with dunya. We have mapped out how we're going to be millionaires by age 30, by age 40, by age 50, whatever it is. How we're going to achieve our worldly goals. But when it comes to religious goals, there seems to be a little bit of a lag. We become a little bit fuzzy in terms of what we actually want and who we want to become. This is the first point that I wanted to make tonight, my brothers and sisters. The second point, my brothers and sisters, if we want to achieve that Husseini spirit, that transformation, one of the things which is important is focusing on something that is oftentimes not talked about during the month of Muharram. What is it? It's eating less. It's being able to control our stomachs. I know, it seems like something which has no connection to Muharram. What connection does eating have with the events of Karbala? Doesn't seem to have any connection. But one of the things that we find is that one of the most powerful desires that we have as human beings is hunger, is our desire to eat. Now here's a question. If I am unable to control my stomach in general, just imagine, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam comes. He tells me that I'm going to send you to a place which is dangerous. You have to go there. Your life is going to be at risk. In fact, I can guarantee that you are going to be killed. Just imagine the fear that you are going to feel in a moment like that. My brothers and sisters, if I can't control my stomach, then how am I going to be able to control my fear on a day like that? If I can learn to master this, then I begin to master other aspects of my life. I can really begin to become more of what I was meant to be. There's a story that I want to mention. That one day during the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, during the time of Imam Sadiq, it was a time period with a lot of revolutions. It was that time when the Abbasids were rising up and the Umayyads were falling. There were many movements that were coming about, and many of the people who were affiliated with the Shias, they were joining these movements. One day, one of the followers, one of the companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he goes to the Imam's house. He says, Ibn Rasulullah, do you see what is happening in the society in the time that we are living in? We are having movement after movement. Why are you sitting quietly in your house? Don't you know that you have all of these followers that are ready to obey your commands? The Imam says that, do we really have that many followers? He says, yes, many followers. They must be in the millions. The Imam, he says, do you see that oven? During that time they had ovens for baking bread. Even today, if you go to the villages in Iran and Iraq, some of the homes, they have ovens. He says, you see that oven? The oven is on. He says, I want you to go inside of it. The individual, the companion, he becomes frightened. He says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, please don't punish me. Please, I didn't mean what I was saying. I'm going to be quiet now. The Imam doesn't say anything. At that moment, another individual, he enters the house of Imam Sadiq. The Imam, he looks at him, he says, Fulan, I want you to go into the oven. This individual, he doesn't even blink. Can you imagine? Just imagine that you are in that position. The Imam says, go into that burning hot oven. You don't even blink, you jump in. This individual jumps in, and this other companion, he's in shock, he's in amazement. This poor guy, he's being burnt to a crisp. Look at him. The Imam just killed one of his companions. After a few minutes have passed, my brothers and sisters, he tells him, Fulan, come on outside. The person comes out, he doesn't have a single burn on him. The Imam looks at that first individual, he says, how many companions do we have like this individual? The companion, he looks down. He says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, you don't have very many. It's possible you don't have any. When we're looking at the perspective of Karbala, we're looking at it from the perspective that if I was there, I would be with the Imam. There's no question about it. We see ourselves on the plains of Karbala, we see ourselves defending the Imam. But what history shows us and what reality shows us is that there were many people better than us, more dedicated than us, who had sacrificed more than us. When that time came, they realized that they didn't have what it took to be with their Imam. It's a tragedy, isn't it, to believe that you're something your entire life only to find out that the entire thing was a lie. 40, 50, 60 years, 70 years, I wasn't being honest with myself. So going back to that second point, the control of the stomach will lead to control of our other faculties. Let us learn to master this, at least for these 10 days. Have a level of control over the things that we eat. Eat simpler foods. Eat less than what we normally do. Control it. Bring it under control. The third point, my brothers and sisters, is the aspect of sleep. One of the things that we find in the traditions is that the Ahlul Bayt, they speak about two things which kill the heart. And one of those things is the aspect of oversleeping, that when an individual oversleeps, it has an effect on their spiritual life. Their heart dies. And we sometimes feel it, that if we oversleep, we sleep 11 hours, 12 hours. When we're reciting a dua, when we're reciting Quran, it's like I can't connect to it, I can't cry. This is one of the things that the ahadith have mentioned. During these nights, let us at least try to minimize our sleep a little bit. If we're oversleeping, cut it down just a little bit. And by the way, the flip side is also true, that if we're not getting enough sleep, the Ahlul Bayt have also spoken about that an individual that doesn't sleep enough, they're not going to have that full capacity to process the Husayni message. When you're tired, you don't have energy, you're not going to be able to have that inner drive to change yourself and to transform yourself. So we have to have a path of moderation, my brothers and sisters. The next point that I wanted to mention is controlling our tongues. You know, it's unbelievable, my brothers and sisters. This tongue, it's so insignificant in our viewpoint. It's almost nothing. But when we're going throughout our day, we realize that with just a few words, we have the capacity to destroy a person's life. We have the capacity to change the course of a person's life. When we look at the Ahlul Bayt, unbelievable stories. Sometimes they would say something to someone in the right way, with the right measure, at the right time, and it would change the very trajectory of that person's life. Learning to control this is one of our most important superpowers. Unbelievable. One of the things that we find from the Husayni message is that, one, you should control this tongue when the time is right, but you should also be willing to unleash it when the time is right. What do I mean by that? When it comes to speaking negatively, a lot of times it's very easy for us to speak negatively. But when the time comes to stand up for haqq, for what is right, to stand up against the oppressor, suddenly we become timid. It's difficult. It's dangerous. It's that human condition that we have. But what Allah wants from us, especially during these holy days, is learning to control the tongue, meaning that when it is negative, we close it. When it is positive, it can have a positive effect on people, we open it. One of the things that we find with the Ahlul Bayt is that they would have silence for long periods of time, but when it was time to speak, They were the most eloquent of the people. The most eloquent of the people. Lastly, my brothers and sisters, the final point from this series of points is that we have to take some time during this holy month of Muharram to reflect. I know we're all busy. We have 9 to 5s, busy with work, busy with family, busy with kids. There's a million things that are running throughout our minds. One of the most important things which Islam emphasizes is an emphasis on reflection. Now for some of you, you're going to say, I reflect best when I am in nature. Go take a walk in the park. Go spend time alone. For others, you're going to say, no, I need to, for example, be in my room. Then spend that time in your room, that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes. Reflecting on our lives is one of the most important aspects, and it's one of the most important things which will allow us to look within ourselves. Inshallah, my brothers and sisters, by using these few points, we can help maximize the potential of this holy month of Muharram. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I wanted to segue at this point into a concept. And that concept is that when we are looking at the events of Karbala, one of the things that becomes very clear for us is that for many of the Muslims, Shias included, there is a difficulty in really understanding the events of Karbala, what took place. And more importantly, there is also a difficulty in understanding the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. Tonight, I wanted to take some time to ask this question of what are the factors which prevent us from understanding the Ahlul Bayt, which in turn they affect us in understanding the events of Karbala. I'm going to mention 3 points, my brothers and sisters. The first point which prevents us from really understanding the Ahlul Bayt, the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, is a lack of effort on our own part. A lot of times when people they come and they say that, for example, you mentioned this point about one of the Imams. I never knew this point. I never heard this point. One of the questions I ask is how much time do we collectively spend learning about the Ahlul Bayt? Every week that goes by, how much time do we spend learning about the Ahlul Bayt? Now some people they might say, look, I already know enough about the Imams. Why do I need to know more? I know the basics. My brothers and sisters, there's a very important point that I'm going to be mentioning here tonight. In this journey that we are on in the path of Allah, where we're moving towards Allah, the degree which I am able to move towards Allah is dependent upon my understanding of the Ahlul Bayt. How? What connection does that have? If someone does not know the lives of the Ahlul Bayt that well, it's going to prevent them from moving towards Allah? It's going to prevent them from becoming closer to Allah? The answer is yes, my brothers and sisters. Why? The reason is that when we look at why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sends us these Imams, He sends us prophets. The reason that He sends us these individuals is so we can see how it's done in real life. If Allah had just sent you a book, for example, imagine He sends you a book and He says that I want you to be good to your families. We would ask the question, Ya Allah, I know it's written in the book, but how is it done? I want to see, is it even possible for a human being to be like this, to be this good? When Allah sends Anbiya, He sends Awliya, He sends us the Ahlul Bayt, what He's showing us is that number one, it is possible to be like this for a human being. And number two, He shows us the details of how it's actually done. The Imam, the Ahlul Bayt, it's an example of an Insan Kamil, that perfect human being. So that when I want to know how do I do it, how do I live my life, I can look at the Ahlul Bayt, I can say, okay, this is how it needs to be done. So that's number one, my brothers and sisters. Inshallah, we need to spend a little bit more time learning about the Ahlul Bayt. The more that we learn about the Ahlul Bayt, the more we are able to grow closer to Allah. It will help us on that path towards the divine. This is number one. The second thing which prevents us from truly understanding the Ahlul Bayt are the preconceived notions, the filters that we place upon our own eyes when we're looking at the Ahlul Bayt. What do I mean by this? I'm going to give you an example. Have you ever worn those really dark sunglasses? You know, sometimes when people have eye surgery, they give them those really dark sunglasses. As kids, I remember, I think my grandmother had eye surgery. We used to take those, we used to wear them for amusement. When we would put it on, that filter that we had placed on our eyes, everything was unbelievably dark. Everything was unbelievably different. The reality that we were looking at was different from that reality that actually was. My brothers and sisters, when we look at the Ahlul Bayt, all of us, we have these preconceived ideas. We say, I want the Imam to be like this, and then we impose some of our own cultural ideas on the Ahlul Bayt. And then what happens? We cherry pick those aspects of the Ahlul Bayt which are in line with my own desires of how I want them to be like. This is one of the things that we do. You know, I remember I was in a taxi cab one time in Iran, and by the way, the worst, the most difficult thing in Iran for someone who's just gotten there is driving or riding in a taxi. I don't know what it is with taxi cab drivers in the Middle East, but as soon as they find out you're not from there, the price goes up 100x. My first 1 or 2 years, that was the one thing that always bothered me. I just couldn't take it. I remember one time I was riding in a taxi. We were going in this taxi cab, and I had just been, I just arrived in Iran. It had been 1 or 2 years. So if I spoke too much, they would quickly pick up that he's not from here, and then they would begin asking the questions. I remember one time we were riding in this taxi cab, and they began to ask these questions from me that, what do you do? And eventually he finds out I'm from America, and then he begins to go off. And by the way, I don't know what it is. As soon as you tell an Iranian in Iran that you're from America, he has to explain to you how horrible life in Iran is and how life in America is beautiful. And he even tells you things you don't know. He tells you how they give you bags of gold and wealth, and everything is just given to you. And you're sitting there like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how many of you have experienced this. We were riding with this taxi cab driver, and when he finds out I'm from America, he begins to look at these people on the street. He says, everything here is horrible. I say, what do you mean? He says, look at all of these people on the street. I said, I'm looking. He says that look at all of them. They're all depressed. They're in a state of depression. I'm looking at these people. They look normal to me. Normal people. I mean, what do you expect? Do you expect people to have a wide smile as they're walking down the street? I mean, if I saw something like that, I would become frightened. I would leave that street. I would leave that country. Something's wrong. What had he done, my brothers and sisters? He had a filter on his mind that everything in this country is depressed, everyone is anxious. Therefore, everything that he saw through that lens, through that filter, it reflected what he had placed upon his eyes. This is one of the dangers as well, that when we are looking at Karbala, we begin to look at Karbala through that filter. It could be cultural, it could be political, it could be spiritual, whatever it is. The danger is that we look at it through a filter and we don't actually see what was taking place. My brothers and sisters, historically, if you look at through history, everyone had their own filter of Karbala. One person would say that Karbala was a political disaster. The Imam rose up due to politics and it failed. It was a political failure. Another person would say it was a political success, but it gained success when? Later on. Another person said, no, it was purely a spiritual movement. You see, everyone is putting their own spin on Karbala. Capitalists would put their spin on it. Marxists would put their spin on it. Feminists would put their spin on it. Every single individual is putting their spin on the events of Karbala. My brothers and sisters, when we look back in history, one of the fascinating things that we find about Muharram is that there were periods of time in our history when kings, tyrannical kings, would actually come and they would participate in Muharram gatherings. Question: how in the world is a tyrannical king participating in the events of Muharram? They're not afraid? Why aren't they afraid? Because that lens which they had given to the people, how the people saw Muharram, how they saw Karbala, it had been altered to the point where Karbala had no revolutionary meaning anymore. It had no potential. When we look at the Ahlul Bayt, we find that the movement of the Ahlul Bayt, whether it was Karbala, before Karbala, after Karbala, it made the tyrants, it made the Khulafa, they weren't able to sleep at nights. They were not able to sleep at nights. So we have to be wary and we have to be careful, my brothers and sisters, how we are looking at these events and whether we are placing our own preconceived notions on it or not. The third and final point, my brothers and sisters, of why we don't really know the Ahlul Bayt as they ought to be known is that when we look throughout the history of Shi'ism, what side were the Imams on? They were on the side of those who were being oppressed, the side of those who were being suppressed. The Shias, if we look at our history, it's a history of people who were hunted down, who were killed, who were imprisoned. This is the history that we have. You know, one of the brothers in San Diego, I remember, he was Moroccan and he had originally been Sunni. He was telling me, I did some research on my family tree and I realized that we were from the Sadat, we were from the Seyyids. I said, how is it that Seyyids, they ended up in Morocco? Far reaches of the Muslim world, why would you have ended up there? He said, you know, I actually asked myself this question, and the answer was that during a point in Islamic history, we were so hunted down that we would flee to the nether regions of the Islamic world where the Khulafa couldn't reach us. This is the history that we have. Rebellion after rebellion, revolution after revolution, movement after movement. But as a result of this suppression, one of the things that we find is that the Ahlul Bayt were forced to perform taqiyya. One of the fascinating things that we find when we're looking at the ahadith, the traditions, is that we find that in some of the traditions, the Ahlul Bayt were praising some of their companions. But when we look at the other traditions, what's going on? The Ahlul Bayt are actually slandering those same companions. They're censuring those companions, criticizing those companions. How do we make sense of this? How is it that in different traditions we have different narrations about these companions of the Imams? The answer, my brothers and sisters, is that in some of those gatherings, the Khulafa would actually send spies. They wanted to see who are the followers of As-Sadiq, who are the followers of Al-Baqir, so that we can imprison them and we can execute them. The Imams would be forced to actually criticize and slander some of their best and closest companions. And then those spies, they would go back, they would narrate that to the Khalif, and that individual would be safe from the persecution of the Khalif. This is the history that we have. So understanding the Ahlul Bayt is made even more difficult. There's a story that I wanted to inshallah mention tonight, and I'll end it here. I know my time is coming to an end for a weekday. In one of the stories that we have from the time of Imam Baqir alayhi salam, during the time of Imam Baqir, he had a companion by the name of Jabir ibn Yazid. Who was Jabir ibn Yazid? He's one of the very close and elite companions of Imam Baqir. One time, an individual by the name of Nu'man ibn Bashir, these two were on the Hajj pilgrimage. As they were coming back from the Hajj pilgrimage, they're traveling together. Nu'man ibn Bashir, he narrates that we saw a rider coming from the distance. He approaches us. He comes to Jabir ibn Yazid. He says, Ya Jabir, I have a letter from Imam Baqir. Here is the letter. Jabir, he takes the letter, he places it on his eyes as a sign of respect. He kisses the letter. He opens the letter. He says, Nu'man says, I'm looking at the face of Jabir as he's reading this letter from Imam Baqir. He says, as Jabir is reading this letter, I see his face, it becomes upset. Have you ever seen someone, they become really upset at something, their face changes? He says, I saw his face kind of scrunch up and become upset, and he doesn't say a word. He closes the letter, he places it in his pocket, and we continue the ride back to the city of Kufa where we lived. He says, we reach the city of Kufa, we go our separate ways. We go our separate ways. The next day that comes, I want to go and pay my respects to Jabir ibn Yazid. He says, I begin to make my way through the streets of Kufa. He says, eventually I reach the door, the house of Jabir ibn Yazid. But as soon as I reach the house of Jabir ibn Yazid, I see something very strange. The door opens. I see Jabir ibn Yazid come out. But the Jabir ibn Yazid that I see is completely different from the Jabir ibn Yazid that I left yesterday. He says, I see three things that shock me to my core. Number one, Jabir ibn Yazid has made a necklace out of animal bones and he's placed it around his neck. What in the world is going on? He says, number two, Jabir ibn Yazid, he comes out of his house, he's riding on a broomstick. You've seen these movies with witches. He comes out riding on a broomstick. And three, he is singing songs which crazy people sing, children sing in the streets. He goes out, I look at him, he looks at me, he doesn't say a word. He goes and he begins to play with the children in the street, and the children are chasing him and singing songs, and he's playing with them, and he's running around in the streets of Kufa. My brothers and sisters, Nu'man ibn Bashir, he says that I couldn't help it, I begin to cry. I couldn't help it. This respected Shia, this great companion of the Imam, he's gone crazy. A few days passes by, word spreads through the city of Kufa that Jabir ibn Yazid has gone insane. 3 days later, my brothers and sisters, the Khalif by the name of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, one of the tyrannical rulers, he sends a letter to the governor of Kufa. He says, "Oh, governor of Kufa, there is an individual by the name of Jabir ibn Yazid in your city. I want you to send your spies to find him, and I want you to arrest him and behead him and send his head to me." The governor of Kufa, he sends out his spies go out. They ask about this Jabir ibn Yazid. Word comes back that he's gone insane. They go back to the governor of Kufa. They say, "Oh governor, this individual, he was sane before, but now he's gone crazy. He spends his time in the streets playing with children." The governor of Kufa, when he hears this, he says, "Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to God, that God has protected me from killing an individual such as Jabir ibn Yazid." My brothers and sisters, what was going on? Imagine how much pressure the Ahlul Bayt and their followers were under during this time period. How much pressure they were under that they had to tell their companions to act insane in order to save their lives. Imagine how much of the understanding of Shi'ism, how difficult it has been for us throughout the ages to transfer this knowledge, to understand this knowledge, to really understand what Karbala means, to really understand who Imam Hussein is. The sacrifices that have been made, the difficulties that people have gone through. May Allah inshallah make us worthy of these sacrifices and these difficulties inshallah. Let us take our hearts to Karbala, my brothers and sisters. I'm going to inshallah do a few minutes of musibah. One of the things that we find when we look at the Anbiya, the prophets of God that lived in times past, centuries before even the events of Karbala took place, one of the things that we find is that the mourning which took place for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it was not something which only happened during the time of the Holy Prophet. No, it was something which, from the sources that we have, many of the Anbiya, many of the prophets, they would perform the mourning over Imam Hussein. They would shed tears over Imam Hussein. They would sit with their loved ones and they would cry over what took place in Karbala. One of the things that we know is that there was a prophet by the name of Zakaria, my brothers and sisters. Prophet Zakaria, he was the caretaker of the lady Maryam, the mother of Jesus alayhi salam. Zakaria, one of the things that he wanted, one of the things that he desired, and he had not been given, was that he wanted children. At this point in time, he had reached a very old age. His wife was very old, she was barren at this time, and Allah had not blessed him with children yet. At this point, Zakaria had really just given hope. He'd given up hope. He thought, cause and effect, Allah hasn't wanted me to have children. We've reached this age where it's not possible for us to have children. I'm going to give up on this. I'm not going to ask Allah, I'm not going to do dua anymore. One day, my brothers and sisters, Zakaria enters the chamber of Maryam. Maryam, she had a chamber inside of the temple, and she would perform ibadah. Maryam, she had this very high rank in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the things that Zakaria sees, and this shocks him, this surprises him, he doesn't understand what he's seeing. He sees that there's a bowl of fruit in the chamber of Maryam. But what is strange about this bowl of fruit is that it is out of season. During that time period, my brothers and sisters, it wasn't like today where we have shippings or shipments that come from the world, from around the world, where we have fruit from out of their seasons. At that time, when you were in a region, fruits had a specific season and you wouldn't see it until the next year. Zakaria, he sees that Maryam, she has this bowl of fruit. It's out of season. He asks her, he says, Ya Maryam, where did you receive this bowl of fruit? Who gave you this bowl of fruit? Maryam, she responds with a very beautiful response. She responds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for whomever He wishes without any hisab. There is no reckoning. When Allah gives, He gives. Something jolts loose in the mind of Zakaria. He realizes, perhaps I should do dua. I should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant me a child. And by the way, Zakaria, what he wanted a child for was that he was worried about his relatives, that if he passes away, these relatives are going to use his position as a prophet to do illegitimate things, to gain wealth for themselves, to gain power for themselves, these kinds of things. My brothers and sisters, Zakaria, he raises his hands in dua. He says, Ya Allah, you are the one who gives without hisab. You give to whomever you wish, whatever you wish. He says, Ya Allah, grant me a son who can inherit my position after me. My brothers and sisters, Allah, He answers the dua of Zakaria. As Zakaria, he's worshipping Allah, thanking Him for what He has given to him, Jibreel comes down and he teaches Zakaria some words. What are these words? He says, Ya Zakaria, I want you to ask Allah by these names that I am going to teach you. He says, I want you to ask Allah by the names of this holy prophet, the final prophet, and his Ahlul Bayt. Zakaria, he begins to mention the names, but he notices something strange. And so he asks, he says, Ya Allah, when I recite the 4 names of Muhammad and Ali and Fatima and Hassan, he says, I feel this sense of elation within me. I feel this sense of happiness within me. I'm overjoyed. I don't know how to explain it. But when I mention that last name of Hussein, I feel as if my heart is going to break. I feel this sense of sorrow that comes over me, and I can't shake this sense of sorrow. Why is this, Ya Allah? Jibreel, he comes down, he begins to explain to him. He says that, Ya Zakaria, at the end of time, when the final prophet comes, he is going to have a grandson by the name of Hussein. When this Hussein comes, he is going to be killed, he is going to be slaughtered by the oppressive individuals. Zakaria, he says, Ya Jibreel, is this really going to happen with your most beloved messenger and his most beloved grandson? Jibreel says, yes, this is what is going to take place. When Zakaria hears this, his heart is broken. He says, Ya Allah, I know that you are going to give me this son. I want you to give him to me. I want you to make me love him like I have loved nothing else in this world. And when you have made me love him like I have loved nothing else in this world, I want you to have him martyred in your path in defense of your religion. My brothers and sisters, this is exactly what happens to the son of Zakaria. Yahya, when he is born, he grows up. Zakaria loves him as he has loved no one else in this world. And when the time comes, he stands up against the tyrants and he is killed in the exact same way as Imam Hussein is killed. But my brothers and sisters, the question that we have to ask Zakaria is that, Ya Zakaria, it's true that you saw your son killed, he was martyred, but you were not there on the day of Ashura. There when you saw Imam Hussein being beheaded. You were not there when you saw Abbas being killed. You were not there when you saw his infant son being slaughtered in front of his eyes. You were not there where you saw all of his companions being killed. You were not there when you saw the bodies being trampled by the horses. One of the things that they have mentioned is that on the day of Ashura, one of the sounds which the survivors heard was the sounds of the breaking of the bones. What was the sound? This was the sound of the bodies of Imam Hussein. The sound of the bodies of the companions of the Imam Hussein as they were being destroyed by the hooves of the horses, as the hooves of the horses were trampling and breaking their bones. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Assalamu alaykum ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifanaik. عليكم مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا حسين. Ya Hussein, 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 همه Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. سلام همه زندگیم، سلام امام حسین من،
سلام همه زندگیم، سلام امام حسین من، سلام عزیز فاطمه، سلام عشق امام حسن. سلام همه زندگیم، سلام امام حسین من، سلام عزیز فاطمه، سلام عشق امام حسن. السلام علی الحسین، نوکرت رو بگیر به بغل حسین، میدونم بدم ولی میدونی تو رو دوست دارم حداقل حسین آقا. هر کاری بگی میکنم، با خیال تو زندگی میکنم، واسه من همیشه بزرگی کن، گاهی وقتا که بچگی میکنم آقا. حسین 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 تو زندگی می حسین، حسین 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 دوست قدیمی حسین، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب. سلام پناه خستگیم، سلام رفیق با مرام، سلام آقای مهربون، سلام دلیل گریه ها، سلام پناه خستگیم، سلام رفیق با مرام، سلام آقای مهربون، سلام دلیل گریه ها. من دلم به شما خوشه، به یه دوستی که داره وفا خوشه، به یه مشهد و به نجف خوشه، به زیارت کربلا خوشه آقا. عشق پای علم باشم، همیشه سر خم باشم، نه 3 روز یه سال تو حرم باشم، تا که راهی اربعینت باشم آقا. حسین 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 تو زندگی می حسین، حسین 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 دوست قدیمی حسین، حسین ارباب، حسین حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب. سلام همه زندگیم، سلام امام حسین من، سلام عزیز فاطمه، سلام عشق امام حسن، سلام همه زندگیم، سلام امام من، سلام عزیز فاطمه، سلام عشق امام حسن. السلام علی الحسین، نوکرت رو بگیر تو بغل حسین، میدونم ولی اومدم تو رو دوست دارم حداقل حسین آقا. هر کاری بگی میکنم، با خیال تو زندگی میکنم، همیشه بزرگی کن، گاهی وقتا که بچگی میکنم آقا. حسین 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 تو زندگی می حسین، حسین 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 دوست قدیمی حسین، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب، حسین ارباب.
سقای دشت کربلا ابوالفضل، سقای دشت کربلا دستش شده هستن جدا ابوالفضل، دستش شده ابوالفضل. سقای دشت کربلا، سقای دشت کربلا دستش شده هستن جدا، دستش شده جدا. من قوتی دیگر به تن ندارم، من قوتی دیگر به تن ندارم، هستی دگر چون در بدن ندارم. سقا رنگ از تشنگی پریده، دریای خون جاری ز هر دو دیده. سقای دشت کربلا ابوالفضل، سقای دشت هستش شده هستن جدا ابوالفضل. سقای دشت دستش شده هستن جدا، تن لاله گون از خون جبین شکسته، لب تشنه و دست از بدن بریده، جان بر کف و در اوج سرفرازی، خجلت ز اشک کودکان کشیده. سقای دشت دشت کربلا دستش شده هستن جدا، دستش شده دریای عشق از چشم ما گرفته، دریای عشق از چشم ما گرفته، هر قطره خون که از بازویت چکیده، هر قطره خون که از بازویت چکیده. سقای دشت سقای دشت دستش شده هستن جدا ابوالفضل، دستش شده از حنجره خشک تو دوست دارم، این بیت را بهتر ز سر این بیت را بهتر ز سر قصیده. والله ان قطعتم یمینی، والله ان قطعتم یمینی، انی احامی ابدا عن دینی، انی احامی ابدا. سقای دشت کربلا ابوالفضل، سقای دشت دستش شده هستن جدا ابوالفضل، دستش شده من زاده علی مرتضایم، من زاده علی مرتضایم، من شاه بار ملک لا فتایم. یا رب کمک کن این فرس برانم، این آب را به خیمه گه رسانم. سقای دشت کربلا، سقای دشت
کربلا سیاهی کتیبه عزا دوباره زده سو سر درا، یکی سر میده این نوا حی علل عزا. سیاهی کتیبه عزا دوباره زده رو سر درا، یکی سر میده این نوا حی علل عزا، حی علل عزا. دوباره موجی از جنون گرفته دل پیر و جوون، میخونه دوباره روز خون حی علل بکا، حی علل بکا. دوباره آسمون نگاه من، آه من قصه داره، از گوش چشای بی طاقتم باز داره بارون میباره. دوباره آسمون نگاه من، آه من قصه داره، از گوش چشای بی طاقتم باز داره بارون میباره. الحمدلله حسین محرمت رو دیدم حسین، به آرزوم رسیدم حسین، پیرن سیاه پوشیدم حسین، محرمت رو دیدم حسین، به آرزوم رسیدم حسین، پیرن سیاه پوشیدم حی علل عذاب، حی علل بکا فی ماتم الحسین مظلوم کربلا، حی علل عذاب، حی علل بکا فی ماتم الحسین مظلوم کربلا. غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر. صداش بزن. غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر. بشین سینه بزن. در غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر، غریب مادر. آقا تو صدا بزن. غریب مادر، غریب مادر. شمیم عطر رازها پیچیده توی کوچه ها، گرفته دوباره شهر ما بوی محرم، بوی محرم. شمیمه عطر رازها پیچیده توی کوچه ها گرفته دوباره شهر ما بوی محرم بوی محرم به راه افتاده دسته ها دوباره تو محله ها به عشق شاه کربلا میگیرم این دم بوی محرم شاه شهید کربلا السلام السلام ای سر بریده شاه شهید کربلا السلام السلام ای سر بریده سلام ما به محضر خواهرت زینب قامت خمیده شاه شهید کربلا السلام السلام ای سر بریده شاه شهید کربلا السلام السلام ای سر بریده سلام ما به محضر خواهرت زینب قامت خمیده الحمدلله حسین محرمت رو دیدم حسین به آرزوم رسیدم حسین پیرن سیاه پوشیدم حسین محرمت رو دیدم حسین به آرزوم رسیدم حسین پیرن سیاه پوشیدم حی علی العزا حی علی البکا فی ماتم الحسین مظلوم کربلا حی علی العزا حی علی البکا فی ماتم الحسین مظلوم کربلا غریب مادر غریب مادر غریب مادر غریب مادر غریب مادر غریب مادر یا حجت ابن الحسن عجل علی ظهورک رو به قبلش عجل علی ظهورک یا حجت ابن الحسن عجل علی بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم اللهم کن ولیک الحجت ابن الحسن صلواتک علیه و علی آبائه فی هذه الساعة و فی کل ساعة ولیا و حافظا و قائدا و ناصرا و دلیلا و عینا حتی تسکنه ارزک سوا و تمتعه فیها طویلا باسمك العظيم الأعظم العدل الأجل الأكرم وبالقرآن المستحكم وبنبيك مكرم وبمولانا أمير المؤمنين وأهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين واستجب دعواتنا يا الله يا الله يا الله. اللهم أجل لوليك الفرج اللهم أجل لوليك الفرج. بار پروردگارا فرج امام زمان را برسان، در ظهور ولی نعمت ما تعجیل بفرما. قلب آقامون از ما راضی و خشنود بدار، چشمان آلوده به گناه و معصیت ما به دیدار حضرتش منور بگردان. مرگ ما را در مجالس روضه ابا عبدالله قرار بده. بالنبی و آله رحم الله من یقرأ فاتحة مع الصلوات.